detention. So this talks about humane treatment of detainees during and after protest by law enforcement agencies that made arrest. While the second question we asked was on knowledge and experiences around ill treatment or torture during detention related to protest. So, and this is our research finding. So, on humane treatment of detainees during and after protest. So, the chart above provides insights into the treatment of detainees during and after protest. Here is an interpretation of the data. Only 10% of the respondents believe that detainees are treated humanely during and after protest. This indicates that a small minority of people feel that the rights and well-being of detainees are being adequately respected. Most respondents at 90% believe that detainees are not treated humanly. This overwhelming majority suggests widespread concerns about the condition and treatment of individuals detained in the context. Okay. All right. This indicates that this overwhelming majority suggests a widespread concern about the condition and treatment of individuals detained in the context of protest. It highlights a strong perception of inadequate humane treatment of detainees, reflecting serious concerns about treating individuals in custody during and after protest. Now we move to the second question. The second question we asked the respondents was that if they have a knowledge or if them have experienced any form of ill treatment or torture during detention as it relates to protest issues. And the chart shows the knowledge and experience of ill treatment or torture during detention related to protest. According to the data, 32% of the respondents reported having experienced or knowledge of ill treatment or torture while in detention for issues related to protests. This indicates that a notable proportion of individuals have faced serious mistreatment during their detention for issues related to protest. On the other hand, 68% of the respondents reported not experience or having knowledge of such ill treatment or torture. This suggests that while a significant number of people have faced these issues, the majority of respondents did not. Thank you very much, Professor Uju, for giving me this opportunity. And that is the end of our finding for this session. Thank you.
All right, thank you again, the hero, for that presentation. And I think it kind of aligns to what we are going to be discussing this morning. And clearly, from the perspective that I am about to present, it's good to see that the issues that we're discussing are issues that bring to bear some very critical points. So I wanted to ask the DG at this moment that I will just make the presentations that I can do, and then we will open up the discussions for other people to begin to comment on this issue. I believe that this is a topic that every one of us will have something to say about. And it is also an issue that lies at the heart of how the nation is seen in terms of these issues. So I would just quickly do that. I will quickly look at how the comments that I'm making and how we're going to kind of look at the discussions going forward. Now, the first thing I would want to say is that the issue regarding protests is an issue that I see people seen from different perspectives. But when it comes to the issue regarding ill treatment, it presents yet another dimension that how we look at it becomes quite critical. So first, every one of us understands the fact that Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation, and the fact that it has witnessed numerous protests over the years, and as citizens continue to show their, feelings regarding some of these issues, it becomes quite important that we look at it. Now, citizens express their dissatisfactions with various social, political, and economic issues. While peaceful protest is indeed a fundamental right that is enshrined in both Nigeria's constitutions as well as international human rights instruments to which Nigeria is a party of, the government's response has often been characterized by violence, arbitrary detention, torture, and ill treatment of protesters. And I think it is important that we see this in these dimensions and look at, and I think over the series that we've been looking at, we've been discussing these issues, and we have been bringing different perspectives in terms of what we should do to ensure that there be a change in terms of the approach so that we can have that basic balance that is required. On one side, not to have a violent protest, on another side, to allow people the rights that is provided for both in the Constitution and also in this instrument, both at the African regional level as well as the international beyond Africa. Now, this issue that I just mentioned has led to growing concerns about the shrinking civic space in Nigeria and indeed the violation of human rights by state actors. And I think it's important for that we see the correlation, we see the link between the reaction of the government to protesters and the understanding of the nature of the civic space that is allowed, or whether it's shrinking, or whether it's allowed to be as robust that as is expected for any democratic nation. Let's look at the issue around protests in Nigeria vis-a-vis the lens of a struggle for expression. Perhaps I could repeat at this point that just like when we looked at the legal framework in terms of protests, we understood that it is not only about the right to assemble, it is also about the right to express. So those two needs to be looked at. Of course, you look at the right to freely assemble, the right to express your of course, not in terms of violating other people's right, but the right of expression, ability to speak freely. And then, of course, the right that it relates to respect for your human dignity, the right relating to protection of life and all of that. So let me start first about this issue about the struggle for expression. Protests in Nigeria have historically been a vital avenue for citizens to voice their discontent. From the anti-colonial protests that we experienced in the 1940s to more recent demonstrations such as the EndSARS movement of 2020 and of course the August 2024 one, the EndBadGovernance protests. Nigerians have frequently taken to the streets to demand justice, to demand accountability, and to demand reforms. Okay? That if you look at the Nigerian Constitution, as I had said earlier, it guarantees the right to peaceful assembly and association, and this you see under Section 40. In addition, Nigeria is a signatory to various international treaties such as the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which also protect these rights. I have also spoken about the freedom of expression. It's also a right that is contained both in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the African Charter, and indeed the Nigerian Constitution of 1999 as amended. In addition, we know that Nigeria have also signed up to many of these international treaties, which of course protect these rights. However, despite these legal provisions, protests in Nigeria have often met with resistance from security forces, resulting in a cycle of violence and human rights abuses. This point we have clearly demonstrated over the various series on this subject matter. Let me quickly talk about the issue about detention of protesters, the issue about arbitrary and unlawful practices. And it is important to note that when you talk about detention of protesters, it presupposes that first of all, there was the issue about the arrest. So we need to also talk about arrest, understand that the concept of arrest, arbitrary arrest, leading to arbitrary detention. Now, detention of protesters in Nigeria frequently takes on an arbitrary nature, where individuals are arrested without cause or due process. The Nigerian police and other security officers, including the military, have a long history of detaining protesters under vague charges, such as breach of peace or unlawful assembly. But now there are others least added to that, issues about treason and the rest of that. Now, protesters are often held for prolonged periods without charge, and in some cases, they are denied access to legal representation or family visits. The use of arbitrary detention is evident in cases such as, for example, the 2015 protest by the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, where hundreds of members were detained following a clash with the Nigerian army. Many were held without trial in direct violations of the country's legal obligation under both national and international law. Now, similarly, during the NSAS protests, several activists were arbitrarily arrested and detained, some under very dubious charges relating to cybercrime or incitement. In the introductory speech of the DG of the Nigerian Institute of Peace and Conflict Resolution, we already had some kind of statistics that are coming out in terms of the number of people who are being charged, who are detained, and who are being charged even following the August and bad governance protests. Now, let's look at torture and ill treatment. How widespread is this abuse by security forces? Torture and ill treatment of detained protesters have been well documented in Nigeria. The Nigerian Constitution under Section 34, subsection 1 prohibits torture, inhuman and degrading treatment in Nigeria. In Nigeria also, it is important to note that we are both a party to the United Nations Convention Against Torture, Cruelty, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment. It's not only that, we are also a signatory to the OPCAT, which is the optional protocol to this convention. And then, of course, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. All of these actually speak against torture. It is important to also note that in 2017, Nigeria passed the Anti-Torture Act. However, in practice, torture and ill treatment by security officers remain widespread. So the special anti-torture squad, like the SARS, the last time, which we had the issue of how torture was used in many regards, in terms like almost like a routine, extracting confession, intimidating detainees, or punishing those perceived those who are dissenting. Now, there are a lot of reports from human rights organizations that highlight these numerous cases, including physical and psychological torture, including beating, including electric shocks, including mock executions, including all sorts of acts of torture, both psychological and physical. Now, these abuses were not limited to criminal suspects, but also has been extended to peaceful protesters. And for those who want to know the full definition of torture, you may also well look at Article 1 of the United Nations Convention Against Torture, Cruelty, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment. Now, we are thinking and saying that these acts of physical abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse such as deprivation of food and water, denial of medical care while in custody, and all of the exposure to overcrowding, to unsanitary detention facilities, exposed even these protesters to further health risk and many others, including, of course, as I have talked about, the issue of the psychological dimension to it. So the issue of excessive use of force was established in terms of the Lekki Toll Gate incident. We've also seen some instances where live bullets have been used, even for protesters that were not seen to be having, carrying any little force. Let me quickly look at the gap and challenges, and as I'm beginning to think of how we can get to solution and then round up. The gaps and challenges between the legal and the institutional framework. It is important to mention this. So I say that while Nigeria has well-established legal framework that prohibits torture and protects the rights of detained persons, enforcement of these rights and these laws remain a significant challenge. The Anti-Torture Act of 2017 criminalizes torture and mandates the perpetrator to be brought to justice. Similarly, when you look at the Nigerian Police Act of 2020 and the Administration of Criminal Justice Act of 2015, as well as the Administration of Criminal Justice laws applicable in many states, you will see that there are some guidelines in relation to humane treatment of detainees and prohibition of unlawful detention. However, systemic issues within the criminal justice apparatus, such as corruption, lack of adequate oversight, and impunity, continues to undermine the effectiveness of these laws. We do have the Police Service Commission, we do have the National Human Rights Commission, we do have even the Complaint Response Unit of the police, whose mandate is about oversighting and providing some form of accountability. But many a time there are issues of under-resourcing, there are also issues of some other challenges that make it difficult for effective delivery of these mandates. If we look at judicial delays and also the lack of access to legal representation for some detainees, again, it goes to increase the duration many of these people stay in detention and indeed prolongs the abuse. Now, let me quickly look at the way forward. The way forward, if I'm to look at the way forward and then ensuring that there is first about how we can then also through this process ensure accountability and reform. To address this issue, it is important to understand that issues around detention, issues around torture, issues around ill treatment of protesters, Nigeria must undertake urgently a comprehensive reforms within its security and justice sectors. But let's be very specific. The first thing we're recommending here, there's a need to strengthen oversight mechanisms. The Nigerian Police Service, the National Human Rights Commission, should be fully empowered with adequate resources and political independence to investigate and prosecute cases of torture and unlawful detention. The second part is about proper reform of the security sector, broadly speaking, both in terms of the training on human rights and also remember what we mentioned even in previous sessions, training on de-escalation of protests. This should be seen as a priority. Now, the third thing is about judicial reforms, and I cannot underestimate the importance of that. Judicial reforms must play a more active role so that we can ensure that the protection of the rights of detainees are done through speedy trials, upholding the rights to bail, and also providing access to legal representation. I will quickly also add that there is a need to have a full implementation of the Anti-Torture Act of 2017. For example, I'm not aware of the prosecution of anyone under this act. I'm also aware that this act does not include in a more strategic way the issue about rehabilitation of torture survivors. So full implementation of this act is crucial. Perpetrators of torture must be prosecuted. The victims provided with avenues to redress, including, of course, compensation and rehabilitation. Civil society engagement is yet another. Civil society organizations play a critical role in protesting human rights abuses, providing legal aid to victims, and advocating for reforms. The government must create an enabling environment for civil society to operate without harassment or intimidation. Let me try and conclude at this moment so that we can have more robust discussion. So I conclude this way. I say, why protest remains a legitimate and indeed an essential tool for citizens to engage in civic participation. The response by Nigerian authorities to dissent voices and to people who have contrary voices continue to be marred by arbitrary detention, by torture, and by ill treatment. Let me say clearly that these violations not only contravenes Nigerians' legal obligations, but it actually erodes public trust in the state's ability to protect fundamental rights. Ensuring accountability and reforms within the security and justice sector is indeed critical. It is critical because it helps us to protect the rights of the protesters and prevent further human rights abuses in Nigeria. But more importantly, it sends the right messages. It sends the right messages. So we must be able to ask ourselves in very clear terms, what do we need to do? How do we need to ensure that the benefit of protest, and just like we have said over and over and again, that when we have an act of protest, there are a lot of benefits that we can engage in, but that has to be very constructive. We need to be able to know that this is a step that enables you to open up and begin to discuss with those who are not happy. Dialogue with them, find out what needs to be done, that these protests don't need to degenerate to violence. But as a people, we have to also be concerned about the image of the country. Is it such a country that is seen as respecting human rights? Is it such a country that is seen as one that opens up the civil space? Or is it one that is seen as shrinking the civil space? I think I want to stop here, but what key recommendation is to make sure that those who are put in custody for acts of protest, we have to be careful and we have to be able to process them, release them, and begin the process of negotiation and discussion. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, DG, for this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Rol. Thank you, Drew, for that expository analysis of issues around arrest, torture, treatment of arrested people and their rights, and of course, perhaps what they call the shrinking civic space, and what the Committee of Democratic Nation State might be thinking of how we handle some of these things. But I think that it's also important to try to stress that issues around protests all over the world, by the time they go violent, the state oftentimes have no option, that to resort to certain measures to ensure that there is some bit of seeming or relative peace, and a calm in violence. I think post-protest management is also very key and very essential in terms of our democratic experience and how we reposition society, for continuous progress and development. So it's a tricky balance, between how the state at times takes certain action and how society, civil society also see it. At times it's a competition. And it is that competition that makes for balance within a society. The state takes certain action, civil society too takes certain action, and then there is a strike in balance, and then the society keeps navigating itself against whatever odds, that is facing it. Thank you once again, Uju. I think the floor is also open now, so you can, because what we're doing, I think I heard you were live streaming, so if you want to talk, you can put on your video the way I have tried to do mine, so that we can see you as you have as you make your contribution. So anyone who is making his contribution, Dr. Gerald, Dr. Megobonu, Dr. Akin Musire, my good friend, Austin Modu, Mohammed Maman, Mohammed Yusuf Gaddafi, Pag, Veron Gwenyi, Samia Jier, and a host of other. Okay, Pag, I see your hands up, please. Can you put on your video so we can all see you and see how lovely, whether you're a male or female? Thank you. Okay.
Good morning, Dee.
Good morning.
Yes, once again, I thank you for the opportunity to join this meeting this morning. And I want to commend PROA for the effort in data collection analysis as well as presentation, as well as commend Dr. Uju for the insight she has provided. My intervention is that yes, the way and manner protesters are arrested and tortured in light of what has just happened now is abhorrent and it is condemnable.
Okay, maybe you can take up your video.
It is always to say in terms of policy, it is good for us to able to see that definitely there are people that are wrongly arrested. There are people also that have gone there and have committed crime, especially those that are anti-protesters. And those that are anti-protesters that are arrested, it is obvious that they are going there to do the wrong thing. But there are other people that are arrested that are there for legitimate purpose to protest, and which is provided under democratic environment that we are practicing in Nigeria. So I think the capacity of the state that we have been hyping all through this meeting is what we need to emphasize, that the state has the responsibility to guarantee security for citizens. And where the state, therefore, just go randomly and pack everybody that is outside, whether you're legitimately protesting or you are there to cause mayhem, is indeed wrong. It shows again the weakness of the state, the incapacity of the state to be able to decipher in between the large crowd of people who are criminals and who are not criminals. And that is even, by the way, because the Constitution provides that you are presumed to the presumption of innocence is on every Nigerian, that you are presumed to be innocent until proven otherwise. And also the time wherein you will be detained and charged is also stated. So my own contribution, sir, is to say that it is important to highlight in the outcome of this deliberation that the capacity of the state to be, especially law security and law enforcement agencies, to decipher, so that we will not, in fact, we are projecting a society, a Nigerian society, that we are all not, we are criminals. If we can just pack everybody, that large number of people, and lock them for the charges allegedly committed, I think that it is important to decipher people that are not, that are legitimately protesting shouldn't be arrested. People that are there to disrupt and to do crimes should be arrested. Those are the ones that ought to be arrested, not everybody, just pack everybody. We cannot rule out the fact that there are criminals that went there to disrupt the process. There are other people that are there to take advantage of the process, but indeed law enforcement agencies must ensure that they secure the lives and properties of Nigerians, and that they can do only when they have the capacity to in fact sift in between the crowd and pick the criminals. And that has been the hallmark of civilized society. Thank you, DG.
I can't seem to see the DG now. So please, can we have Osimodu unmute your mic and video and speak? Well, you just want to speak now? No. Yeah, thank you. And others can also show their digital.
Okay, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. And we are so excited that such a topic is unfolding. Well, my intervention, can we all hear me, please?
Yes, go on, Modu. Go on, we are seeing you.
Oh, okay. Well, what I want to say, I want to look at it from the angle of the criminal justice system. Because if we have a very faulty criminal justice system, whether we like it or not, we would still have the issues surrounding torture and illegal detention happening around those that are protested or those that are find themselves within the space of correctional institutions. Now, my intervention basically has to do with the end game that comes in within the criminal justice system, which is the correctional facilities. It is important at this moment to note that even the officers that are handling criminals and non-criminals alike as presumed by law in the correctional facilities, their perception to whoever walks into that place is fundamental. I'm saying this because most times when anybody walks into the correctional facilities, there is this notion that whether we like it or not, these are presumed criminals, even though prosecution has not taken place. And this is because there is this labeling theory that have been attached to it that once you find yourself within the correctional facilities or in the police stations, as other people might want to use that name, you find out that the perception or the way they approach them is quite different from how other people would perceive them even in advanced societies. So what I want to say is that there is need for us to actually take a critical look at even the officers at the criminal justice system, so that this idea of anybody that walks into the system is already a criminal, and then there's no differential in terms of the differential treatment in terms of who is a criminal, who is a protester, who is a protesting and the anti-protesters. So my point exactly that I want to say is that we know we have before now in these meetings that protest is legitimate. Now, if protest is legitimate, once they leave the protest ground and they are being arrested, which is, it can be normal, when they get to the end game, which is the prosecution, the criminal justice, the end game, which is the correctional facilities, how they are perceived matters a lot as far as torture and detention is concerned. We have actually seen, even before the previous administration, there are some people that have been protesting and they have been in the detention facilities even to date. And the government and every other civil society organizations have actually tried. And then there's a limit to which they can try to see what they can do to bring them out. So it is key to at this moment to point out that our officers who are the end game of our prosecution and the criminal justice system, which is the correctional facilities, need to have this idea, need to understand those that have come in that. And I'm saying this because if you look at we have over 70,000 inmates, for example, in the country, and more than half of them are still awaiting trial. So they are still presumed innocent or except they are tried. If they are not tried, how then can we even say they are criminals also? So I think the emphasis also should go into the criminal justice system, that there should be an appropriate way of handling anybody that walks into the criminal justice, so that to avoid, we are all over the world, torture is unacceptable. But here in our country, we find it day in, day out, and then there's absolutely nothing that most people can do about it. So that is what I want to say, that attention also should go into the officers who are at the correctional field. Let them be able to, let them have this knowledge and training that in handling those that are in the criminals, whether those that are prosecuted or those that are awaiting trial, there's a limit to which you can take torture or illegal detention. That's my intervention, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin Modu. Dr. Akin, the stage is for you now. Please, can we take you now, please? Dr. Akin Musere.
Okay. Good morning, DG, sir, and thank you very much for the anchor.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you. Good to see your face this morning. It's looking shiny and bright. Thank you so much. The stage is yours.
Thank you, sir. And thank you very much, Prof, for that insightful presentation. For me, I think it is very, very important at this stage for us to begin to engage with law enforcement officers on the various regional links works, like the African Charter. You know, we need to, just like the Pastor contributor mentioned, that they need to be trained. They need to know what torture is, and they do not have to go there. And those legal instruments are already there. The African Charter, the various articles, let us really know the rights of individuals on various issues. So it is important for us to engage with them and train them and let them know. And then the Istanbul Protocol as well. The Istanbul Protocol is a best practice. We engage with them on this legal framework, as well as the protocol. I'm glad that Professor Agoma also mentioned that national preventive mechanisms, of which the National Human Rights Commission is taking a lead in Nigeria. They have that mandate. And so we, as Institute of Peace and Conflict Resolution, civil society organizations, we need to engage, on this NPM and see how the judiciary, the security sector, and even the legislative and the executive arm, need to engage with them to have this understanding of all of this legal framework and instruments, because the way we are perceived as a nation outside the continent is very important, and it will go a long way even in our various reforms, whether security sector reform, the justice sector reform, or penal reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akin, and nice seeing you, at least putting a face to to the name today. Yeah, I will miss it again. So we'll take the next person. I saw, which hand is it there? I saw earlier on. Yes. Yeah, we've taken Pag, we've taken Austin Modu and Dr. Akin. Any other person? Dr. Mbegobono, Dr. Gerald Okafor, Mohammed Maman, Damilola Baker, Balkisu Bello, anybody who want to take a shot at it again. And if there is none, I think we'll cycle back again to Professor Oju. Let's hear more. I knew that you spoke halfway. You were vexed about some of the issues, and I think you still want to do some bit of expository analysis, on these issues. So please, can we hear you again?
No, it would not be. It's just to tie things up together.
Yeah,
First of all, I think it is clear that we do have a lot of legal framework that speaks to the notion of torture. And it's important to note that under no circumstances is torture allowed. Not any, there's nothing that you can say to justify the use of torture, both in the international space, regional, or even vis-a-vis a particular country. So so you can't say I tortured him because he was protesting. No, or I tortured him because of whatever, because he committed crime. So you need to go through. Torture is not one of the sanctions, coming from a legal process. So what you see is that you expected to follow the right course, even if somebody had committed offense. And all of the international instruments speak to that fact. All of the regional as well as the domestic, which is Nigerian laws, both in terms of the Constitution and, of course, all the other laws that have been mentioned, be it the ACJA, which is the Administration of Criminal Justice Law Act, and Administration of Criminal Justice Law, and all the rest of that. So that's one. Still connected to this point, it's important to stress the fact that by the virtue of our Evidence Act, even when you can now prove that whatever evidence you have before the court was gotten through duress, through torture, it is also inadmissible. So again, just to say, from the face of value of it, torture should not be allowed. Now, we do know that in practice this happens, and that's why you saw, for example, the NSAS panel that you saw, both the one constituted by National Human Rights Commission and many that were happening across the various states, that a lot of issues were looked at and many people were found to be guilty of torturing persons or doing any other act, whether it's extrajudicial killing and all the rest of that. Now, when we come back to the notion of protest, I think over the various series, one thing we have established is that there are different ways to de-escalate any issue of violence, any issue of violence. So rather than do things that will, it's like almost putting more fire where there is already fire. There are processes that should be done to make sure that it's more calm. We also agreed that basic issues in terms of training needs to happen. Now, so one is that it is not allowed by law. Two is that when it occurs, what are those processes? One of the key processes, and I would just outline them, is that the relevant professionals should also be able to document these things. And when you look at the Istanbul Protocol that was mentioned by Kemi, you will find out that in that Istanbul Protocol, it talks about different processes that can be done by the lawyers, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, and all the rest of them, so that the acts of torture can be properly documented. And why do you document? You document so that you can bring a matter against whoever has been the perpetrator, so that you have enough evidence to be able to address, to seek redress. Also, there is also the issue about proper rehabilitation and reintegration for those who are torture survivors, torture victims. So that also needs to happen. Now, we had come to a conclusion that when it comes to issue of protest, and I do like the idea that was mooted by one of the speakers that said there needs to be a proper determination of who you are arresting. Are you arresting this person because he's a protester? Or are you arresting this person because the person had carried out a criminal action during a protest? And that those people who have infiltrated or who had very terrible intentions, not because they are protesting, but because there were other acts of criminality that have been carried out. And I think this is a very thin line that the law enforcement agencies must be able to be sure and prove that the persons who you have arrested, you have arrested the person because of an act of criminality. If the reason why you are arresting is to stop the protest, as we saw yesterday, there were different things we can do to reduce that, to make that not to be the case, to different things we can do to ensure that tension is brought down. So the final point for me, DG, here would be, all of us that are gathered here, what will be our personal role? What will we see as what we can do, either at the personal space or at the institutional level, or whatever sphere of influence that you have, to contribute towards this discourse? Maybe in terms of promoting more training, more awareness, letting people know that there are things that they can do to make sure that protest is peaceful, to make sure that perhaps even when it's necessary to prevent, I mean, if there's need, because if someone says, I am going to protest, so, if you're able to meet the needs of that person beforehand, or you're able to negotiate or able to discuss ahead of time, that won't happen. So I am thinking that we must look at very constructive steps to take as a nation that not only make people get angry, but make people reconsider, understand your own space. And yesterday, again, I was running some trainings for security agencies. And I again repeated the same thing. And I said, why do people protest in the first instance? They protest because they're not happy. Okay? So when somebody's not happy, when you come up and then arrest the person, lock the person up and detain the person, have you made that person happy? So perhaps we should do more in terms of strategic communication, strategic engagement, to be able to reduce the tension rather than make the more difficult as a country. So it's not about shrinking the civic space, it's about opening up participatory democracy, but also letting sure that every side gets to be heard. And the government should also make sure that their views are heard and negotiated along with other parties. DG, let me stop here so that you can at least conclude. Thank you, DG.
Thank you so much. Drew, maybe I should put my video camera too so that people can put a face to the voice. Thank you so much, everyone, for today's participation in yet another series of End Bad Governance, End Hunger Protests. And like I said, it's a continuous conversation and discussions, within our national space. Existential realities, and how people's coping mechanism and how they react to it will oftentimes see us going through the same cycle of events. So our analyses are still very relevant, and like we all agreed, both the research, the perception research survey, as well as the conversations and the various contributions we've had from respective stakeholders on this platform, we'll be upscaling it to relevant authorities, and we believe and hope that appropriate actions will be taken so that we can have a change in the direction of travel. So today is Wednesday. That's the end for this week's engagement on End Bad Governance.
No, we have one tomorrow.
Okay, we still have one tomorrow. Okay, we'll have one tomorrow, and then we'll have the second one after that. So we see tomorrow, same time, 8 o'clock. Thank you so very much, and do have a great day.
DG, we have one, the hate speech comes up at 9 to 10.
Okay,
today is Wednesday.
La 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 la.